Okay, so now we are on to the second block of the Sampler Spree by Susan Aki book. And this block is Cherry Basket. And you can find that block on page 15. So first thing to do to create this block is we are going to do stitch and flick corners using segment A and segment B. And we're going to create stitch and flick corners in these two corners. So now, if I'm at my sewing machine bed, I am sewing on a Baby Lock Chorus, and so I have the laser light, which is amazing, but you can also use diagonal seam tape if you'd like, just to keep things nice and aligned. I'm gonna go ahead and move my laser beam because I want it to be centered. Here we go. And I'm going to take piece B, and I'm going to put the right sides together in the upper corner. And I'm holding piece A so that it is wider than it is tall. That's important, okay? So I'm going to put this up here in the corner. I'm going to align my laser beam so that I stitch corner to corner. If you're using diagonal seam tape, I've put the diagonal seam tape down so that those who are using diagonal seam tape can see how you would use that as well. You would align it on this center line. If you don't have either of those options, you can go ahead and just draw a line from corner to corner and sew right on top of it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. I apologize, this looks a little awkward, and it's only awkward because I'm trying to make sure that I don't bump the camera that's sitting on my shoulder. Okay. And so you can see here, I have stitched diagonal to diagonal. And do the exact same thing in the opposite corner. And once that is done, I can just trim off the excess, leaving a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You can do this with your rotary cutter and ruler, or you can just eyeball it like me, because it's faster. Okay. So I've gone ahead and I've trimmed that down. And now I'm just gonna press it. I'm using open seams for all of my pressing on this, because these blocks have a lot of different seams that come together. And so by pressing all of my seams open, I'm gonna reduce the bulk overall of this quilt top. So that is the first set of stitch and flip corners that we have to do. And the order that you construct these blocks matters. This block gives you a very like foundation paper piece look without actually foundation paper piecing, which is really nice, but the order matters. So this is the first thing we're doing. We have stitch and flipped the B onto A, and now the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to place our C blocks and our D block around the A block. So I'm going to grab those pieces and I'll see you in a minute. Okay, so here's our A with the stitch and flip corners. These are our C's. And so we're going to place those on either side. And then this is piece D, and it goes across the top. So the very first thing we're going to do is stitch these onto either side. So I'm going to go ahead, move my laser light over. I'm going to switch to my patchwork foot. Using the right foot, guys, it matters, okay? It really does. And it might seem like, oh my gosh, she switches feet so often. I'm really only switching between the same 2 feet. but it really does help. It really does matter. So I'm gonna go. And I'm gonna go ahead and attach these to both sides before heading over to press it. And now I'm just gonna press this open. And I've said this in previous videos, I'm a best press person. If you're a starch person, if you're a water person, that's also fine, steam, but we wanna use something to make sure that our seams lay super flat, because the crisper we can get these blocks, the better. You are making a lot of blocks for this quilt, and we want it to turn out the absolute best it possibly can. You're putting a lot of work and effort. Like, don't cut corners in silly places. Okay, so now we've got that, and now we're going to attach D to the top of this block. We're just gonna flip that on down. And now it's time to press this up. Okay, so we are pressing that, making sure that's coming out nice and smooth. And now the next thing that we want to do is to use our E squares, which are from the light background squares, to create stitch and flip corners in these corners. I know, okay? So we're gonna grab those, and then I will meet you here in a moment. Okay, so now we're ready to make stitch and flip corners up in these corners using our E light fabric. So just like we did earlier with the B, we're gonna place these up in the top corners. I'm gonna switch my patchwork foot. I'm gonna move my laser. Now, again, if you don't have a laser, you will maybe doing this with just diagonal seam tape or drawing a line across it. Then do the other side. We'll trim those corners, and then we'll press them up. And here we have the top of our basket handle. It is starting to come together. Now next we are going to take pieces F, G, and H, and we are going to stitch flip or stitch and flip corner those as well. And so we have pieces F, G, and H. And we're going to stitch and flip them, and we're going to stitch and flip them into opposite corners. So this column I'm going to stitch and flip so that they go this way, and this column I'm going to stitch and flip so they go this way. So then this one, we're gonna do the opposite direction. And if you hear squeaking in the background of these videos, I need a new sewing chair. Unfortunately, so one of the best things about my sewing table is that it's counter height. And I really have a thing with like aesthetics. And so I have purchased, and this is like the third one I've purchased, beautiful chairs that are kind of like on pedestals. And so after a while, or if I'm being 100% honest, after my husband sits on them, they end up becoming squeaky and just a big pain, especially considering the fact that I record videos and podcasts in here. So I think I just have to bite the bullet and get like a really good koala chair, because it's just the best chair there is. So I've stitched and flipped, I've trimmed, I'm gonna press this, and then we're gonna stitch and flip again. So we've stitched and flipped, and see how they're going in opposite directions. Now we're gonna stitch and flip them again. Okay. Trying not to block the view with my hands. I apologize if some of your view gets a little bit obstructed, because I'm trying not to block your view, but I'm also trying to get a straight seam. Oh. I wonder why that first one didn't stitch, the second one stitched. Sometimes the magic of television. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and trim it, and press it. And this is one of those times where you're like, oh, this is where she was talking about fiddly bits. There's some tiny piecing happening. If you are pressing your seam allowances open, then you are seeing things kind of start to overlap. So now we are going to sew these onto the sides of our basket handles. So we will align this, and you may notice that with your stitch and flips, things are getting a little bit like wide or straight. Keep the big base fabric as your like dimensions that you want to follow, and anything that's off of that, don't follow it, because those are your stitch and flips. And we're going back to our 1/4 inch foot. And I'm moving my laser. And now we're going to do that again over here. We are going to add this. So let's flip it over. Press it, and once we've pressed this open, we can kind of set this aside for the time being, because the top half of our basket will be complete, and now we have to work on the bottom half. Okay, so I'm just still over here pressing. making sure it's as flat as it can be, in really good shape, ready to go for the next step. Threads Erwer. Okay, now this is our top half. Okay, so we're gonna set that aside, and now it's time to make the bottom half of our cherry basket. So first, we are going to sew together I, J, and K. Okay, and so this is going to create the basis of our basket. So we'll just go ahead, lay one right on top of the other, line it up properly. Okay, I'm going to go press this open. And then we're going to attach this to this. I kind of wish I had done a better job of fussy cutting that navy blue stripe, because I could have gotten that perfect stripe of snowflakes across it, but oh well, not a big deal. In the grand scheme, not going to be a huge issue. So when you lay out this little miniature strip set that you created, the next thing you want to do is stitch and flip the corners, and you want to make sure that the wider piece is on top, and we're going to be stitch and flipping these corners. So we're going to switch from our patchwork foot back to the basic. On mine it's J foot, and we're going to align our pieces. I'm going to go ahead and move my laser, because I'm obsessed with my laser. Line it up. And we're going to do the exact same thing on the other side. Sometimes that happens where no matter how slow you go, you start to pucker your fabric just a little. And so you might want to get your starting point just past your needle hole so that it doesn't get sucked down into your machine. And so now we've sewn that on, and I'm going to clip those right off. So now we're left with this, and we will stitch, press that open. I apologize if you saw some camera wiggle just there. Camera is balanced on my pressing table. So now we've got this guy, and he is going to get attached to this guy. You see what's happening here, folks? You see? It's all coming together. So let's go ahead and stitch that. We're just going to line that right up. Align that just like so. Okay, and I'm switching to my patchwork foot. Oh, I forgot to move the laser, but that's okay. I will just use my patchwork foot and my diagonal seam tape. And so now I will press this. And I am trimming these threads as I go. You will be happy that you did it if you do it as well. So we're just pressing this on. If you use Best Press, what scent do you guys like? I'm a big fan of the fresh linen myself. I'm just curious. So that's it. That's the top part of our basket. It's almost done. Now we need to use pieces M and N to create the base. And to do that, we're doing rectangle to rectangle construction. So what you'll do is you'll take your M piece and one N piece, and you will place them on top of each other like so. If you don't have diagonal seam tape or a laser, I suggest drawing a line. Otherwise, use your diagonal seam tape or a laser. And you're going to stitch right across that. Just like with stitch and flip. It basically is stitch and flip. It's just rectangle to rectangle. And then you're going to do the exact same thing on the other side. And even with diagonal seam tape and the laser, you may find it easier to go from the other side in order to see kind of where the diagonal should start and stop. And now you've got this, and it's going to become the base over here. So now we just sew those together, and then cherry basket is done. It's super satisfying how fast some of these blocks come together. It can also be just a smidge frustrating how cattywampus some of these blocks come together. So keep that in mind. You are not alone. And they come together cattywampus because you've got a lot of pieces. So if yours isn't coming out like perfectly straight, first of all, you have seen that I have trimmed certain pieces to be a little bit straighter. I am going to go ahead and trim this up, press it, and then I'm going to have you follow me over to my cutting table, and we are going to square this up a bit. Now, we'll follow the size recommendations from the book of what the finished block sizes are. And the finished block here is going to be 6.5 not sewn in, and so it'll be 6 once it's sewn in. So here goes our quote block. And you can see mine kind of hang out a little bit right here. Like it's not perfect. It's not gonna lie, it's pretty darn good, but it's not perfect. So let's head on over to the cutting table. So here's the thing, guys. Mine is not perfect. You can kind of see through the ruler. I'm a hair shy in some places, pretty much in the same place in those stitch and flips that were on the base. And I'm over in some places. So I'm just gonna go ahead and trim it. And it's not a ton coming off. If I'm being 100% honest, there's like barely anything coming off. And there you have it. So this is kind of the best part. The good thing is I've gone over the 6 inches all the way around. And so that's the most important thing. I've pretty much got the 6.5. There's like little bits, little places where I've not quite made it. This is kind of the worst of it right here. And I still know that I will catch it when I do my 1/4 inch seam allowance with my sashing, which is why it's so important when we're putting together these blocks that we have the sashing for the 4s that go together as well as the exterior sashing. This is where we're going to make it up so that our blocks look perfect. Okay, so there you have it. Here goes your cherry basket, and I'll see you in the next video.